Hello, everyone. We are back for another episode of the Breathe Deep framework that I have used, like you heard in the intro. And I have my lovely friend here, Jenniffer Johnson. Um, so Jenniffer, can you first introduce yourself? Tell everybody who you are, how many kids you have, and then we'll get into the question.
Yeah, so thank you, Lesline, for having me here. And first of all, I love the title of um, the podcast, Breathe. It really resonates with me. I'm Jenniffer Johnson. I am a life and mindset coach, as well as a holistic occupational therapist. I'm also a women's self-defense instructor. And yeah, I'm really happy to be in this space. And I have a 6-year-old right now. And yeah, it's been quite an experience, quite a ride for sure.
Yes, yes. And so you see everyone, Jenniffer does all of the things, which is amazing. Almost every woman that I have met in the past year or so is doing amazing things. And I am honored to have you just share your mom knowledge. So we're gonna get into the questions. I'm looking down because I have the questions on my phone. Um, so this as you see the title of the podcast, this episode is we're getting into the letter A of breathe deep. So A is allowing the feelings. So Jenniffer, her approach, and she could speak also what she does, but the reason I brought her on for A today is because everything Jenniffer does and how she shows up in the world is heart-centered. It's love. Like Jenniffer, you are love. Like that's just who you are. A little backstory of how me and Jenniffer met. We were in actually two different coaching programs, and we both became certified as life coaches, then did peer coaching together. It was not happenstance that we got paired to be peer coaches because then all these other things started to come from that. But I've noticed that Jenniffer is just love and you're just easy to talk to. I've cried with Jenniffer, like bawled my eyes out, tears, snot. Okay. This Jenniffer is just she's just love. And it can sound woo woo and hippie, but it's like, it just feels good to be in a space with Jenniffer. So if you were watching or listening, I know you feel it. I know you already feel it because I do. So I want Jenniffer to talk about what that means, like allowing the feelings as a new mom. Like, how can new moms allow their feelings in a heart-centered approach?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for everything that you've shared. I feel the love and I receive your words. And I think even as you express that, allowing is really allowing yourself to receive what it is that you're experiencing. And I think a lot of us, and I can speak for myself even as a new mom, I wasn't really receiving what I was doing or what I was giving to myself or to my child or to anybody. And I think it's just allowing yourself to process what it is that you're feeling. And I think from a heart center space is just being very honest. I think it's identifying, first of all, what are your values, right? When you know what your values are, so for example, for me, one of my biggest values is honesty, right? And I struggled, if I'm honest, when I went through my postpartum journey because I was not being honest with myself. I was not allowing myself to be honest. And when I started to notice, wow, am I being true to myself, right? With the honesty or just even what the different core values, even love, right? Am I allowing the love to be entered from others or even from myself? That really shifted things for me because I was like, okay, allowing is just kind of like even when you think about um if you get a cup of water and well when you get a cup and you start pouring water into it, right, you're allowing the water to flow into the cup, or at least the cup is allowing the water um to be filled. And I feel like it's the same with us. It's just being in this state of like being able to receive, right? So if you're feeling any kind of emotion, is receiving that emotion for what it is, right? Not putting a face value of, okay, it's good or bad, but just saying like, okay, like I'm experiencing this feeling. That's okay, right? I think a lot of times what happens is, and I can speak to this for myself, was, you know, I guess with society or just in general, people feel like they have to be a certain way or they have to look like a certain mother, right? And so we have so much expectation of, oh my goodness, like I have to do this for the child. I have to look like this or I have to do this, but it's allowing yourself to be who you are and whatever it is that you're experiencing. And from a very heart centered space, I could just be like, even just going back to your title is breathing, right? And one of the things that I tell people is, the first thing that we were given on this earth is breath. And that is the first thing that we forget to do, right? God blessed us with breath. And I mean, even as we speak, right? It may be easy for me to hold my breath because I get excited, but it's just taking that moment to pause and say, wow, I'm allowing myself the simplicity of just breath and saying, I am alive. My heart is beating, right? And just digesting whatever emotion comes and allowing those emotions to come with ease, really, because for me, if I can share my experience, what happened being a new mom is, for one, there's no manual, right? And yes, there's certain things that are intuitive that like, okay, I can do that, and it just kind of comes to you, and you kind of hear the whispers of like, okay, like that feels right. But parenting in itself is not as intuitive, right? And so it's allowing yourself to mess up and be okay with that, accepting that and saying, you know what, like I'm learning, like I'm allowing myself to be in this journey where I'm processing, these new experiences, these new emotions, because if you're a new mother out there, the emotional dump that you get as soon as you have the baby that nobody tells you about is real, right? And you're just kind of like, okay, like how do I deal with these emotions? But it's just allowing yourself to say, well, okay, I have this emotion, I have that emotion, and just being easy with yourself and saying, okay, what do I do with this? Sometimes you don't have to do anything other than just sit with it and embrace that at least you're feeling them, right? And I don't know if you wanted to add on to that. But allowing is such a big word. But it's, I think a big thing from a heart-centered place for me that has helped is letting it be easy. And what I mean by that is I think of images, right? So I associate everything with images. Like we all think of images. It's easier for us to, like, if I were to say, hey, I give you one word, you may not identify it as much as if I were to give you a painting and you're like, huh, that's interesting. Like I see it now, right? I'm very visual. I know we all are different kind of learners. But just seeing, allowing with what resonates with you, like if you had to create an image for allowing, what would that image look like for you, right? How would that picture or that visual look like for you, right? And knowing that it's yours because we're all different. I think that's the other part of allowing is that we're all so uniquely and beautifully made that we get to allow that process, that we don't have to be like somebody else, right? And just embodying that, right? That's another really heart-centered way of just accepting like who you are and embodying that love and saying, okay, like I'm allowing myself this love, right? I'm allowing myself this ease and I'm allowing myself to breathe through these experiences. So,
I
yeah.
love that. I was writing notes because Jenniffer shared just so much with us in a great way, especially as a new mom. I want to go back because, like I said, I took notes while you were talking because it was just such great things. And I want to go back to how you were saying, you know, A is allow the feelings. How do we do that? And one of the first things I heard you say was to identify our values.
Mm.
How can you go into that more? Because especially for new moms, right? And like I, say in the intro, I deem a new mom as somebody with kids under the age of 5. So if your kids are 5 and under, you are a new mom. I'm still a new mom because my kids are 3 and 4, but they're actually, my son is turning 5 this year and my daughter's turning 4. So I'm almost out of the new mom bracket. But how do we do that, Jenniffer? Identify our values as new moms when we're it's a lot. Like, especially if you have like an infant and they are that newborn infant, they are depending on you. So when you say identify values, can you like give the people that are listening like a simple way of doing that? Because I know when I hear identify values, I'm like, oh shit. I'm just like, okay, so I gotta like, I don't know. Because if I can be transparent with you, I didn't find myself until I had kids.
Mm.
So I and that's where a lot of the crying and stuff when I first after I first had my kids, a lot of the crying and the the mental health journey that I went on was because I was grieving that I never found myself before kids. And now that I had kids, I'm different. I'm not the same person. So I was grieving. I was grieving that I never found that Lesline before kids. And now I had to find this new Lesline. And that in itself was a big mental shift for me. And I did start finding what my values are and what was important to me. But can you give the people here that are listening and watching, like, how can they do that? Because what I'm trying to get across, not what I'm getting across is you're not the same. Once you have a kid, the old you is by. Like it's gone. It is what it is. And I don't even like to say it like that, but it really, that you are a new person. So can you explain how can we identify our values as a new mom?
Yeah. So, what I found helpful for myself is really listening to the cues in your body, right? So it becomes almost like a semantic experience. And for those of you that don't understand what semantic experience is, really understanding the cues that your body's giving you. Your body's giving you a lot. And especially if you've been through labor, you know that your body was talking to you as you were having the contractions, even if you had a C-section or if you had a vaginal birth, it doesn't matter. Your body's talking to you, right? And the same way that you experience that through birth, your body's talking to you all the time. And so when you start to take action, right? And what I mean by action is when you're caring for your child, perhaps you have the sleepless nights, perhaps you're breastfeeding, perhaps you're doing different things. It's taking that moment to understand, well, what is your body telling you? Like, what is it that is constricting you? And what is it that is making you feel more expansive, right? That's where I was able to identify my values, where I was like, okay, this feels really good to me. Every time that I do this, like I'm being honest with myself. And that's kind of where honesty came. And then as I started kind of putting pieces together, I'm like, wow, honesty has always been a value for me my whole entire life. The pieces just kind of came together as I started listening to what my body was saying, right? I think that's the easiest way if you don't have the time to sit down and say, okay, well, let me think now. I have this whole list of words. Which one resonates with me or whatnot? That's another way of doing it too. I mean, you can go and kind of search certain words and see what kind of resonates with you. But I find that might be a little bit overwhelming where you're like, okay, which one? There's 20. Which one do I decide? How do I condense? I think if we think about a heart-centered way, it's just really going within and saying, let me be honest with myself. What feels good and what doesn't, right? Once you've identified that, you start realizing, okay, this is not feeling good. perhaps it's not, it's something, you kind of start choosing your battles really at that point of what's important to you, right? Because like you said, your identity, everything changes when you become a mom, right? It's almost kind of like you said, you now have outgrown this. You're like in a cocoon, you've outgrown that, you've become like a butterfly now, and then it's just the different stages of how that just starts blooming more and more. um, so I would say that in terms of values, it's really starting to see what you value for yourself. So not even just, because I find that there's values that you can have for your family, right? Family values. So really just separating them, right? It's like two different compartments. It's for you as a whole, as a person. What do you identify with, right? What are your must, that if you had to just pick three things, right? And not even to limit it, because sometimes when you feel like there's limiting, there may be some just restriction or constriction, but really saying, okay, maybe for you is a value is joy, right? You know that you've always been this joyous person, that they need that in their life, right? And when I say by need, it's not necessarily like if you don't have it, you're gone, but that may be just something that you're like, okay, now how can I embody that, right? So these different cues, when you start listening to your body, right, and even from the experiences, you start realizing like, I need more of that, or I want more of that, and you start identifying, okay, this is definitely something that is in my list of like values. Like when I have that, I feel this sense of ease. I feel connected. I feel like I can breathe. And that's where you start getting like that alignment piece where you're like, I feel good. I feel like I'm being me, right? So I would say that for whoever is listening, as a new mom, is really going within to understand what your body's telling you, just like the contractions that you felt, because your body, you may not be aware of it. That's the other thing, is bringing that awareness and saying, that didn't feel good. And if it didn't feel good, then perhaps identifying like, am I doing that so often that I'm kind of going that direction? And that is just kind of, not allowing you to express what that real value that you really want is, right?
That,
So, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Jenniffer. That is very important, what you just said about sometimes, a lot of the time, we're not aware, right? And we don't want to feel, a lot of us don't want to feel, right? We live in a society that's like it talks about, escaping, numbing our feelings, numbing our emotions, because a lot of us are too afraid to go on the other side, to go in the messy, right? Of the anger, the frustration. And on the bottom of anger really is sadness, right? It's sadness. Going back to what I said, I was like, I was grieving the past Lesline before kids. That grief was sadness. It was sadness of what I was not able to do, right? But on the other side of embracing those quote unquote bad feelings, that's where you get to identify your values, your musts. That's I like what Jenniffer, what you're saying was identifying values, also known as your must. What must you have need, or your necessities? What do you need in your life so that you can live that expansive life? And to be honest with y'all, I didn't hear that word expansion until like a year or so ago. I didn't know that expansion was something that I could feel as a human being, especially as a mom, because when you hear, and that's something I'm breaking with this podcast, and dismantling whatever it is like, as a mom, you can live a full, expansive, thriving life. We are not here to just survive, okay? We are not here just to survive. So it's really important what Jenniffer is sharing about identifying those values, but knowing that when you identify your values, it's not just like sitting and meditating. Sometimes it's like, figuring out, like Jenniffer said, going back to the somatic, the physical, like what doesn't feel right, and like knowing that it's okay if something is off, especially if you just had a baby, like especially that first month. I remember actually the first 2 weeks, the doctor was like, we took the baby, you need to take the baby to the appointments. Like it feels like every single day, those first 2 weeks. And they're like, yeah, the first 2 weeks, it's a whirlwind. And I was like, oh, okay. Like it, and just hearing the doctor say that made me feel like a little better because I was just like, this, it was just like, what is happening? Like, so I say all that to say, like, just take it one step at a time. If identifying values is too much for you, you're already doing enough though, like listening to this podcast. So don't overwhelm yourself and be like, okay, now I have to do the values and the da 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 da. No, like just take a moment and as you're listening to us, just breathe. But I want to get into the next question, going back to, well, I'll just get into the next question. So, do you remember the first 2 weeks with your daughter? Like, do you remember the first 2 weeks of having this newborn infant? And more in depth, like, what were you thinking? Like, what was going through your head? Like, so yeah, share like if you remember, because I know she's 6 now, so it's probably like, oh my god, that was so far away. But spill everything if you can, but what you're comfortable.
Absolutely. Interestingly, I do remember those 2 weeks. And I will say because before I had the baby, I prepped myself. And, I was already kind of in the yoga community. I did a lot of meditating, I did a lot of things. And so one of the things that I had promised myself was I'm going to feel all of this, right? I wanted to go the whole holistic route. And the first 2 weeks were by far the hardest 2 weeks of my life because I don't care what anybody tells you, like, oh, you're not going to sleep and you have to change diapers or whatever. You just hear those things and it goes from one ear to the other. But when you're actually living it, right? I will say, like, I didn't know that, not sleeping would affect me and just what my hormones were doing. The first 2 weeks, like I said, was just an emotional dump for me where I had every single like emotion you could imagine. And at first, I pride myself for like, oh, I'm not gonna cry. And I'm like, no, I gotta cry. Like it's just I would just cry out of random things. I was cleaning like bottles or whatever it was that I was doing, and I found myself just like crying and not understanding what I was experiencing. And I would say that it was difficult for me because I had a hard time breastfeeding. And if I'm honest, because I was so, those first 2 weeks were just like, I wasn't sleeping, obviously. I was waking up. I was kind of like, oh my gosh, like, am I doing the right thing? Am I changing her the right thing? Am I carrying her the right thing? Especially if you're a mom, you're like, this is the elements were just weird, right? I was like, how do I juggle all these things? And I can tell you, and if I'm being very transparent, like showers for me were they didn't happen very often, right? And it was just mostly like, how do I balance all of this? How do I get in the rhythm of all of this? And I remember that my inner dialogue was not very positive because I was thinking, man, I wasn't prepared for all of this. I've experienced it. I've helped people with children. My sister has 3 children. I went through that. But there's something where, hey, you take care of them and then you give them back. But now I had this human that I felt so responsible for, right? It's almost like you have this like very delicate glass. And now you're like, what do I do? And those first 2 weeks were just, like I was saying, I wasn't getting enough sleep, obviously. And I didn't even know how to use the breast pump because I had to do like breast pump. Like, unfortunately, I was having issues with her latching, which is another emotional roller coaster, right? You're like, oh my goodness, I've always wanted to do this and dealing with those emotions there. But once I let that go and stop, like gripping of the outcome, it started working. But when I remember when I was pumping, I only had one pump on and I didn't put the other one. And I'm like, why is the milk not coming out? Like that I was just so delirious at that point that I was, it just things were just so foggy. But one of the things that really helped for me during those 2 week periods was just allowing myself to cry, allowing myself to feel and allowing myself to know that I've never done this before. I'm okay with this. Like, okay.
Right.
And um it was just definitely, so I would definitely say for, those new moms out there, is bring compassion
Mm.
to that experience. And what I mean by compassion is just by telling yourself, like, man, you're doing a good job. Like, you had the baby. Like,
Yes.
now you
Yes.
had the baby. Like, acknowledge that you had the baby,
Yes.
because that in itself is an experience.
Woo!
I don't think women like give themselves that credit. Like, look, you for one carried the baby
Yes.
and you delivered the baby, regardless of how it happened, right? Because
Right.
they're both, I mean,
Mhm.
I ended up having a C-section and had a very long experience, but it's like, acknowledge yourself for that first and say, wow, like, I did it. Now
Yeah.
the next phase, welcoming that next phase
Right.
that, has, it's like that reframing of words. And obviously now we've done our personal development,
Mhm.
and these are things that I wish somebody would
Yeah.
have shared with me. Um, and I love that, you asked that question. I hope that that kind of gives
Yeah.
you a little bit of a picture of that. Yeah.
That was an incredible response. You had the baby. I want to talk over. You had the baby. And it's so funny because I had my kids technically like back to back. They're called Irish twins, so they're like 18 months apart. Like they look alike and everything. And those first few weeks, if I it was a blur. So I'm so happy that you're like you remember. But I wanted to say like even to this day, because like I said, my kids are 3 and 4. There will be times where I'll tell my husband, I'm like, I gave birth. I was pregnant because I was technically pregnant for 2 years. Two
Yeah.
years I was pregnant. So once I got out of that fog, because that's something I feel like it was foggy, like those first few months after having the kid. It wasn't until maybe like a year or so, a year and a half ago, that I started feeling like myself. But like I shared with you all, it's a different myself. It's not the Lesline before kids, but I started feeling like more like, okay, like I'm a human again. I'm not breastfeeding there. I'm not constantly being touched on. But now that I'm like, I had a like it's now that I'm like, I had a baby. Like I birthed this kid. So I will joke with my husband and be like, if he says like, you need to do this or whatever, I'm like, I birthed these kids. I was like, do you not remember I was pregnant for 2 years? And he's like, yeah, whatever. Like rolls his eyes, but I'm like, because it's me processing. I had a baby.
Hmm.
Like, and I just want, like, if you're watching or listening to this and your kid is like, they're still newborn, and that's why I deem new mom on 5 and under, because your kid's working on potty training or you're breastfeeding, your kid is depending on you. Like we're not in the phase yet where they're playing the Roblox and they're going on the field trips, and like they don't need us physically as much, right? We're not in that stage yet. We're in the kid, like the kid needs you to survive. So give yourself credit, like just give yourself credit. So if the crying happens, cry. Like don't numb yourself. And when I say numb, I don't even mean like drinking alcohol. I mean like don't ignore it, because ignoring is numbing as well. If you're just like, I'm gonna watch TV, and that's fine too. Like, please watch the TV, take that me time, but it's important to like allow the feeling. So let's keep okay. So during those 2 weeks, as soon as you have a baby, for some, you have a lot of family around, or you have people that are helping you. Or while you're pregnant, we hear this phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. Um, I know I heard that a lot. So what did your village look like?
Yeah. So that's an interesting question. And I will say that because it's true, it takes a village. Um, However, in that time period, my husband and I decided to move to the country, and we didn't have a lot of family around, and we had friends or whatnot. But we were very grateful that we were able to have family come and stay with us, like intermittently for the first 3 months, which I would say are very crucial when you're going through, this new reality now that you're a mom and you have a baby. And so I had my mom, I had my sister, my mother-in-law, and just friends. But ultimately, if I'm being very transparent and honest, it was my husband and I. And like I said, we had friends or whatnot, but I think really in terms of like the village, I kind of looking at it now, like I said, we had a really good support systems. But I think when you're inside your home and it's just you and your husband, it's like you both really need to support each other, right? Like the village starts from within, because when those people go home, right? And those people, like, they're with you within those crucial times, but when they go home, the reality sets in that it's the two of you, right? It's not just like one person. And, kudos to all the single moms out there, right? That are doing that alone. Like, please give yourself that gratitude and that especially that compassion that like, hey, you're doing this, right? Like you're fronting this like alone, but knowing that that's really kind of like where the reality sits in. But I do really feel that having a support system is important, right? Knowing that if you did need help, you know who to phone and who you can call, right? Because I did have that, right? So I would say that intimately in the home, the village is really you and your spouse, right? Setting those foundations and what you want your routines or your rhythms and your boundaries and your balances to look like, right? As you're raising your child. And then beyond that, it becomes more like your support group, your support system, right? Who do you have that you can communicate with if you're having certain feelings, or if you needed food, or if you whatever it is that you need. And I had to get really vulnerable and realize, like, okay, for a long time, I wanted to do things alone, right? And that could just be from upbringing and our belief systems. I had to challenge that, and I had to realize, like, no, we all as a collective, there's so much that you can do together. And I was like, you know what? Set that pride aside. Like, I'm going to call a friend. And I know that that friend will be there for me. And they were. And so I think that's kind of where the village piece comes in, where when you are in need, or when you just, you know, you you kind of like your circle of influence really matters, right? So it's really identifying, who is your circle of influence, right? Who are those people that can elevate you in those moments that you are not your best and you not feel judged, right? Because that's the other thing is, you feeling that you can be yourself and allowing yourself to be yourself. And that goes back to the A, is allowing yourself to be you and say like, hey, like, I'm not doing too good,
That's
right?
important.
I need help, right? I need help. And I found myself in certain points where I was like, I need help.
Yeah.
And they're like in a heartbeat, right?
Right.
And when you realize like, wow, like they really challenge that belief, and
Mhm.
it almost becomes a learning experience when you allow that to happen and say, okay, can I have a support group, right?
Mhm.
And some people may have been raised to always have the support group, so it's easy. But for
Right.
those out there listening that feel like I have to do this on my own, it's great. Like, yeah, you can tell a story on later, but think of how much hardship you deal with internally and how much you hold within, because you're like, man, this is hard.
Exactly. It is
And it
hard.
doesn't have to be
Yeah.
that hard in terms of the support system
Right.
wise, right?
Yeah.
But really identifying, just that circle of influence. And I think what I really learned from that experience, even with the villaging, is trust.
Yeah.
Can I trust myself and trusting others? But really, the trust came from within, is allowing myself to trust me, first of all, with my instincts and with what, intuitively I would like, the gifts that I was provided to give my child, and, the village that I had within my home. And then when I had the trust within myself, it was easy to have the trust within others.
That's good. And I think that's why I want, as Black people, women of color, a lot of us were taught we have to do it on our own, because I know I'm first generation. So my parents, immigrated from Jamaica to the States. And it was like, you keep your head down and you do it on your own. And it made sense for them at the time, but like, we don't have to live like that. Like, we are better together, that like it's so true what Jenniffer said. We are better together. And becoming a mom, I don't want to say forces you, but it really makes you realize how important community is. Community does not have to be so village and community. That's what we're getting at, right? Is the importance of community. I didn't know the importance of community. I didn't know that I was hungry for it. Not even I
Yeah.
was what's
Yeah.
beyond hungry. I was like, once I got into communities that I needed, I was like, wait a minute, am I introverted? I just needed like people that are like me,
Yeah. Yeah.
and if I didn't become a mom, I would probably still be very lonely, very shy, wouldn't really do a whole lot with myself. And because becoming a mom, it opened up so much for me. Becoming a mom really, and I know it's majority moms listening to this, but becoming a mom, it really changes your life for the better. It's for the better, because it forces you to do the work. If like I told you all, I didn't find myself until after having kids, because like Jenniffer says, it's an emotional dump. Those first 2 weeks, you experience every emotion known to man. You experience all of it. And it's either you continue to survive and just like ignore all of the emotions, or you're like, okay, going back to I'm gonna allow myself to cry. I'm gonna allow myself to be vulnerable and ask for help. Because like Jenniffer said, when you text that person or call, if they're in your best interest and love you, they will come. They'll be like, say less, and they're already on their way. I do want to preface, like, if you are a single mom, like Jenniffer already did say, like, look to support groups online. Do not sleep on Facebook. So like put in like support group for new mom or whatever it is. If you are still struggling to find that support, please reach out to me. Let me know, like, because that was something that I struggled with, which I'll share on another episode, of how I ended up finding communities to help me grow. And like, I'm in multiple communities and I need all of those communities because they all help with certain things that I need. So community is important. All mothers need community. Super mom, superwoman is done. It's old news. We cannot
Yeah.
do it all. Patriarchy or whatever you want to believe, they have conditioned us to believe that because they don't want us to thrive. In order to thrive, you need community.
And I
So
agree with that 100%. And that word community definitely resonates 100%, right? It's
yeah.
like you that support that you get from a community and just the energy in itself is, especially in those crucial times where you don't really know yourself anymore because you just had a child and you're like, oh my goodness, like especially for the very like new moms, like your firstborn,
Yeah.
right? And
Yes.
maybe even the second one or the third one, you feel like you have things figured out, but then there's like a spin where you're like, oh my God, I thought I had it figured out, but things changed again,
Yeah.
right? And you may not get like the emotional roller coaster dump to like the third one, and you're like, oh my goodness, like, right? So yeah, community 100%.
Yes. We have two more questions.
Yeah,
I like to keep it funky, keep it transparent here.
I
So,
love it. Yeah.
did you want to be a mom like before you found out, like, oh, I'm pregnant? Like, were you a child that was like, yeah, ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be a mom? Like, what type of person were you?
I'm going to be very real. When I was little, I did not want to be a mom. I did not see myself having a child. I loved kids, right? I was like always like, oh, I'm going to be a teacher, or I'm going to be someone who like education or whatever the case is. But I felt like that was just such a huge responsibility that I was not sure. And I think a lot of this came from self-image. And for those of you that are thinking like, what is self-image? Is the image that I had of myself, the identity that I had of myself then did not feel good enough to be a mom, right? Because I lived with women that I'm like, wow, like they're doing all of this work. Like, I don't know if I'm cut out to do all this work. Right?
Because they're
So as
probably
a
doing it by themselves. Because they're
because
probably
they were doing it by themselves, absolutely. And like you, first generation child, like my parents migrated from Colombia, right? And they did the hard work, right? They came in search for the American dream, and everything was like alone, and not necessarily, I don't know. But anyhow, that's another story for another day. Um,
their podcast.
so I would see that and I was like, I don't know if I want to deal with all of that. That's a lot. Like, I'm a handful. I could only imagine what, like, if I had a child, what that would be like. But then, of course, as I started getting older, and I think I had my child when I was 29. I want to say I was 29. So I had her pretty later
Yeah.
on. I started realizing, like, you know, what would that look like to have an extension of me and myself, right? I started just kind of becoming excited by the idea of like, oh my goodness, like bringing another human being here, and what else do you do, And so at that point in my life, I had transitioned from like, hell no, I don't want a child, to then like, yeah, like that would be super exciting, to have a baby. So we were trying at that point mutually to have a baby. And it was interesting though, because I don't feel like my husband was necessarily prepared.
Yeah.
Um, so he actually, like, we prolonged the process, which was fine, because I really do feel that when you're both kind of mutually there, you're never going to be prepared to have a
Right.
baby. Like, let's be real here, right? You can try to put all the pieces together, or all like the dominoes in place, and it never really, like, it's just the unexpected. It
Yeah.
really is.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, to answer that question, initially no. After I started realizing who I was, and things started changing, I realized, okay, like, yeah, I think I could be a good mom,
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
I love it. I love that answer. Yeah, that's a question that we'll be hearing throughout this episode because I feel like I don't hear it enough. And because this is my podcast, we're gonna ask because I also the reason I asked that question is because I feel like that has a lot to do with how we hold space for our feelings once the baby arrives. Because if you didn't want to be a mom your whole life, right? Then the baby comes and sometimes we have resentment and we're like, what, why do we have this? Like, if you're doing the work, which you already are because you're listening to this podcast, you're like, why am I having this resentment? Like, this is how you're allowing the feelings. You can simply just ask yourself the question, like, why do I resent this baby? Like, be real, like, like, and then it's like it has nothing to do with the baby. It's just because, did you want to be a mom? So I would love for you all to unpack that, like journal that, take that as homework. That's how you can allow the feelings. Like, let it out. Let it out. Just let it out. It's okay. There is no judgment. Know that. And know that the biggest judger is yourself. It's not God.
100%.
It's not God. God loves you unconditionally. God loves you so much. And that's something that I had to work through in therapy because I thought God would judge me for thinking things a certain way and doing things a certain way. So I just want to say that to you, like, God loves you so much. Write it all out, type it all out, get it out of you so you don't have that resentment towards your child, because the child, they don't deserve that, and they're here for a reason. The child is here for a reason. They're here to do their purpose on this planet, right? So anyways, okay.
Thank
Last
you for sharing that. Yeah. And just echoing to that too is really, if you are feeling any sort of resentment, like identifying that, like how you said about not wanting to be a mom. Because if I'm even more transparent with you guys, and this may resonate with some of you, and maybe sound a little shallow, but that's the judgment that I had to deal with myself, was part of me didn't want to have a child because I always wanted to have a boy,
oh
right? And that's really interesting because I ended up having a girl.
yeah, she has a girl, guys.
And I'm very grateful for my girl, but I also had to process that, like, okay, like what's coming up for me? Like, why did I want to have a boy? Like, what is it that's coming up for me? And dealing with those emotions, and not to like get personal, but I've talked to numerous amounts of people that have had that similar experience, and that how that can actually, be part of that journey of the processing that you were just mentioning, Leslie, and not holding that resentment of like, oh man, and like I said, I'm super grateful. Like God blessed me with a super healthy child. My 6-year-old going on 30, she's amazing. She's literally a mirror of me. And like you said, these kids come here for a reason, right? We're not necessarily giving like given what we want, but
Yeah,
we're given what we need,
that's it.
right, to grow
Mm.
and to become expansive, like you mentioned earlier in this podcast. It's really about expanding,
Mm.
right, and
And
allowing
expansion
yourself to see
hurts.
what's
Expansion hurts. It's also known as stretching, if you
it's
will. Like,
stretching. Yes,
yeah, it doesn't
just
feel
think
good.
about like,
Mhm.
yeah,
It
it
gives
and
you, when you expand, sorry, I know, but when you expand,
yeah,
it gives you more room to what Jenniffer was saying at the beginning, to hold more love, to hold these feelings. Because the reason a lot of us are afraid to hold the feelings is because we're like this, like physically, a lot of us are like hunched over, closed off, clenched jaw, like, but the more you expand, and it's uncomfortable at first, it doesn't feel right because you don't do it. But the more you open yourself up, then you're able to take on the feelings for yourself and process it in a healthy way. So,
yeah. And if I could just add one more thing to that, Leslie, is also remembering that you are not your feelings.
mm,
Okay, we, like as a collective, and I'm gonna even talk for myself, right, and not kind of put anybody, like you do that or whatever. Is in the past I was in the habit of saying I am this,
mm,
but we are not that feeling, and that's really something that I've taught my daughter is like, you're feeling that and you're experiencing that feeling, but you are not that feeling. That's why we get to process those feelings. We
mm,
get to feel them, right, and be gentle with them and allow them to come, because that's not who we are.
mm,
So I really just wanted to put that out there, is notice the verbiage that you use, right? I am sad.
mm,
I'm feeling sad. That these are feelings. This feeling is sadness, but I am not sadness. That sadness does not define me.
mm. That's important, everyone. You are not your feelings. That is very important. And I think I maybe said this in the show notes, but we hear, like, we're going to close out, but before we close out, we hear a lot about gentle parenting, right? And you see this a lot on the TikTokies, you see it everywhere, gentle parenting. And we're teaching our kids to have these big feelings. And what Jenniffer just said, we're teaching our kids all of that. Like, you are not this, you are not that. So the same thing Jenniffer said that she shares with her daughter, like, you are not those feelings. Like, you get to process them, but I am sad. Don't say that. Say, I am feeling sad and I'm able to process that sadness and blah, blah, blah. Do that for yourself, mom. Like, as the mom that is watching and listening to this, do that for yourself. Because when you're able to, what we're also talking about is emotional regulation. When you're able to emotionally regulate yourself from the jump, and like I said, from the jump is that 0 to 5. you are then able to help teach your kids, like how Jenniffer is saying. She's now able, and I know her daughter is probably very like good with processing all of that, because Jenniffer is an amazing person. So, but you have to do it with yourself first. You have to do it with yourself first. You have to know like how to identify your own feelings. So then when your kid, as your kid gets older, because I will say now that my kids can talk and are building their personality, like are coming into their personalities, they have a lot of emotions. And I catch myself getting uncomfortable because I wasn't allowed I wasn't allowed to cry for like more than, I don't know, a minute or even that. Like, fix your face, stop crying. And it's like, now here I am, trying to figure it all out. So I just say that to say, like, kids are mirrors. We're all mirrors of each other. But anyways, that was a good question. I loved your answer with the whole, did you want to be a mom? That was beautiful. Okay, last question. What advice, I feel like you said such great stuff. Like, I don't even say that, like, you said amazing things, but maybe for people that just fast forward to the end, what advice would you give to new moms?
You know, the advice that I give to new moms is, for one, you can't get it wrong. Okay. So accepting that what you're doing is enough, first of all. And secondly, invest in yourself, right? Invest in yourself, and whatever that looks like, right? It's not necessarily, okay, go get a massage, go get your nails done. Maybe that's like, hey, investing on a mentor, right? I know that I've done that. That's changed my life, and in so many different levels. Investing if you need to get a new bed, because you want better quality of sleep, right? Maybe that could be the issue, the reason why you're not sleeping. Investing in just time, investing in time for yourself, even if that means I'm going to take 5 minutes and go to the bathroom and just breathe and just connect with myself, right? But I think the investing portion, right? Really taking that seriously and knowing that, investing time to just figure out who you are, right? And as I kind of talked about it in the beginning, you know, allowing these feelings to come in, investing in that time to spend with yourself. And what I would say, one of the last things that I would say is, we can read a lot of things, we hear a lot of things, but at the end of the day, you're uniquely and beautifully made. So trust yourself. Trust yourself and know that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, right? As a mom. And if for whatever reason you're doubting that and you need the self-confidence or the self-esteem, or you need a sounding board or whatever it is to kind of work through that and see what's possible for you, then I definitely recommend to go out there, find community of women that can elevate you and get you to a point where you're like, wow, like it is possible for me, because it's possible for all of you, right? There doesn't need to be that struggle or that feel of I need to survive. It should feel like the beautiful thing, like thriving, right? And if like me and Lesline, like, you maybe you grew up in a state where, not a state, but just the family background where it's like, okay, you got to do this alone. You don't. And give yourself permission to say, I don't have it all figured out. And it's okay. It's okay, right? Invest in yourself, right? Do yoga, meditate. And if those are big words that you're like, I don't know what those means, it just means find time for yourself to breathe, to be in stillness. And stillness is just you allowing yourself to feel, and allowing, going back to what the title of all of this is, it's just allowing it, and allowing it to feel good. That's what life is about. It's about being, and being able to experience it, being joy, being love, being kindness to yourself first. Because if we don't give it to ourselves first, we can't give it to anybody.
We can't. We really can't. I heard
If we
that.
give love, yeah.
I heard that differently just now. That's wild, because you can hear things over and over, like yours, and like you just saying that, it's so true. If you're not showing yourself that love, that kindness, that beauty, you how would you know how to give it to somebody else? It really like I heard that differently today. Anyways,
Yes.
wow.
Especially for your children, right? So love yourself first so that they can see that love that you're giving to yourself. And then it's so easy to give it to your child. So easy because you do it for yourself first. So, so much love to all of you. And again, give yourself that kudo and hugs. Like you had the baby, you did it. You are amazing. And so are you, Leslie. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenniffer. This feels really good. This was really good, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. You're doing a great job. You really are. Till the next episode. Bye.